Welcome to the very first episode of Dan Really Likes Wine. I'm Dan Nicholl, and this is a wine show that aims to take some of the intimidation factor out of wine. All too often we see a wine list or we hear a wine conversation and it's all just a little bit overwhelming. It's a little bit pretentious, a little bit self-important. This is trying to demystify all of that and to celebrate South African wine, which in my book is some of the best in the world. I got coerced into doing this by my good friend Michael Jordan, a former bank teller who's now wandering barefoot around Stellenbosch selling wine. He reckoned this might be the way to go, and I reckon if I have to spend each week tasting some fantastic South African wine and sharing it with all of you, well, I'll be all right with all of that. And we do have a wonderful selection of wine to start off with. What I thought I'd do is start with week one with 4 wines that I really love. None of them are terribly cheap, but they do celebrate the very best of South African wine. I love red blends, and these are 4 of the best.
Well, that, believe it or not, was over 6 years ago. That was November 2016 when Dan Really Likes Wine first started in the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar, which has now become cellar and studio. And the reason for bringing that back up and adding a wisp of nostalgia to the opening of today's show is that a brand new chapter unfolds. Now, you might have seen part of it yesterday. We were down at the Norman Goodfellows store at Four Ways Crossing, where we celebrated this new chapter, a brand new partnership as Dan Really Likes Wine and Norman Goodfellows hook up and work together for the foreseeable future, because it turns out Norman Goodfellows' team rather likes wine as well. So it's a great partnership where we're going to be doing all sorts of really cool things, celebrating great South African wine, lots of cool events together. We've got a digital shop up and running. I'll tell you more about that a little later on in the show, feeding some unique, some cool, some rare, some boutique wine into a space for you to go and have a look at and add to your cellar collection and explore a little more, mostly but not exclusively, South African wine, and really just revel in a space that, since those nasty dark days of COVID and lockdowns, has flourished once more, and I think is in a pretty healthy space. And if you heard Rico Besson and some of our winemakers on the show a few weeks ago talking about the 2023 harvest, there is a general spring in the step of the South African wine industry, and it all speaks to a space that has bounced back really well. So a particularly good mood to Dan Really Likes Wine today, and we're going to be going back to those 4 wines, not exactly the same vintages, but to those 4 wines from that very first episode back in November 2016, and to those wines adding 4 people who know them rather well, a representative of each of 4 formidable names in South African wine. But before we do that, let's head over to our news and see what's been happening over the last few days. Well, this was our launch yesterday, and what a crew of people. Jason McAvoy on the left, he's the CEO of Norman Goodfellows, and Bali Zondo beside me is the group marketing director. Greg Maloka, who is something of a wine legend as well as being a radio icon in South Africa. Damien Joubert-Wynne, who heads up the marketing team down at Telegraph, and the Joburg foodie, last seen being dragged around Stellenbosch by Mike Ratcliffe in search of wine bars. Not the hardest things in the world to find. We must link to that. So that was a lovely piece they did together. And collectively, some of my guests, along virtually with Greg Sherwood and Michael Jordan, who got me started on the show, as well as Morne Frey, the viticulturist down at Telegraph. This was at Norman Goodfellows yesterday as we kicked off our new partnership with a brand that I think is a really nice fit for Dan Really Likes Wine. Believing in wine, loving wine, and determined to get more South African wine onto more tables, into more homes, get people understanding it, confident about drinking new and different stuff, exploring new producers, new varietals, new vintages, and reveling in the wonder that collectively is South African wine. So big thank you to Jason and Mbali and the team. Thank you to Damien and his team, and more about them in just a moment. And to Steve and Greg for joining us for a very special day yesterday with Norman Goodfellows. Then this is the team at Takara, and this was something happened a little earlier on this week, the launch of their new vintages. And it's a really interesting space, Takara, at the moment, because for many people, Takara is still the home of great red wine. And that Tilos, you see the second bottle along, they only make 1,000 of them. It is a fairly pricey bottle of wine, a fairly hefty bottle of wine that speaks to the Cabernet Sauvignon majesty of that particular part of Stellenbosch. Headlines a really good range of red wine, the Takara Cabernet Sauvignon, the Director's Reserve, but there's also an increasing conversation with Takara about their white wines because they've won a lot of awards over the last while, and their Director's Reserve, that Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend, that Bordeaux-style white blend, is one that's got a lot of people very, very excited over the last couple of years. But probably what was most exciting in the last week, and the news came out from Takara at a lunch at Marble, is the fact that a 780 kilowatt solar plant has been commissioned at Takara to get them off the grid, get the entire estate powered by natural resources, and to avoid the challenges of load shedding, which are bedeviling the entire country, but the wine industry really, really suffering. So Takara taking a big step forward. It is a massive investment. It reflects the green credentials of the estate, and I think it's a kind of story we're going to be seeing from more and more South African wine estates. And this is coming up at Idiom. Lovely views, but not just the views to look out for, because coming up this weekend, the 4th and 5th of March, the annual Italian Festival. Now, if you've had wine from Idiom, you'll know that grapes like Sangiovese tend to feature quite heavily in the Idiom range. There is a strong Italian feel to the history and ownership of the estate, and as such, they will be getting everybody together this weekend to join up and have wine masterclasses, eat Italian food. There'll be a deli running, and there will be all sorts of Italian joy. There might be the occasional footballer collapsing in a corner without being touched over the Saturday and Sunday. That's going to be a lot of fun, heading out to the Salaries Pars Village. It's a beautiful spot. The view from the top deck there where the restaurant is and the tasting room is magnificent, but those gardens and the Italian festival will be equally distracting come this weekend. Right, so that is what is happening. I must apologise, we've got a little bit of light on us. This was an emergency move when Eskom decided to cut the power a little unexpectedly in the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar. We've got our own solar solution coming in the next couple of weeks. But to cheer you up for that, we've got a really cool competition running. And I mentioned that Delegraph had a big role to play. They've produced something rather cool for us, so let's have a quick look at what Delegraph have on offer for month 1 of the Dan Really Likes Wine partnership with Norman Goodfellows. As the brand new partnership between Dan Really Likes Wine and Norman Goodfellows kicks off, so too does our very first competition with Delegraph, the height of luxury in the winelands. How do you enter? Very simple. Buy any bottle of Delegraph on the website or at any of the 7 stores across South Africa, and you'll go into a draw. What do you win if you go into that draw? The prize of a lifetime. 2 nights at the luxury Delegraph estate, valued at over 60,000 rand. On top of that, we'll throw in airlink flights to get you down there if you don't live in the Cape. It's an extraordinary prize from Norman Goodfellows, Dan Really Likes Wine and Delegraph. All you have to do is get to a Norman Goodfellows store or jump online to Norman Goodfellows or the Dan Really Likes Wine pop-up store at Norman Goodfellows. Buy yourself any bottle of Delegraph, and that amazing 2-night stay at the estate could be yours. Now, one of our guests is not just the man behind one of the most exciting luxury wine brands in the world. He also happens to be the chair of Stellenbosch Tourism. So I'll have to ask him just how highly he rates a stay down at Dele. Very easy. Get on to Norman Goodfellows and either in one of their 7 stores across the country or online, any bottle of Delegraph, into the draw you go, and you could be on your way to Delegraph. Flights from Airlink, who launched their brand new frequent flyer program yesterday. Skybucks, they'll whisk you down to the Cape if you don't live there already, and you will have the opportunity for 2 nights of sheer luxury at Telegraph. Well, luxury embodies the wine that we have on the show this evening. And I remember sitting and wondering, what shall we do with this very first episode back in 2016? Shall we go with some nice, simple, accessible, inexpensive wine that speaks to a broader market? Or shall we go with stuff that really makes a statement? And boy, did we make a statement with that first collection of wine, because we went with a quartet that at that stage really were as big as any wines you get in South Africa. And big means not just the bottles themselves, they are fairly hefty. These were big wines in style. They were also even bigger wines in price by South African standards. Although today you'll find that I don't think any of these sit in the top 10 most expensive wines in South Africa at the moment, although I'll stand under correction with our guest. What it does offer me the opportunity to do is both look back fondly on the 6 and a bit years since we started Dan Really Likes Wine, but also to talk to 4 very important people in the wine industry and get their thoughts on the progression of luxury wine and the brands that they represent. So in no particular order, a great pleasure to welcome back onto Dan Really Likes Wine, because all of them are good friends of the show, from Ernie Els Wines, and I was down there over the weekend, Louis Strydom, winemaker and managing director, the wine Svengali and marketing genius behind all manner of brands, but most pertinently for today, Vilafonte, Mike Ratcliffe, the marketing director and I think head of tasting for every time I bump into him, at Anthonij Rupert Wines, Gareth Robertson, and the winemaker at Waterford, Mark LaRue. Guys, welcome all, and lovely to have you on Dan Really Likes Wine. I think we have Gareth kicking in. We are chasing that. We've got Mark as well. So, guys, welcome. Lovely to have you on. Lovely to have you back. It was pretty nostalgic for me watching that little clip at the start of the show and seeing what we were doing back in 2016 when I looked a lot younger, and all of you look exactly the same as you do today, which is slightly annoying. Gives me a great opportunity also, though. Let's have a look at the progression and the story of these wines. And I think in kicking off on that, Louis, if we look at your signature from Ernie Els, if I go back even to 2016, at that stage, it was still very much a heavyweight wine in terms of price, but also a bit of a market leader, because this was the first wine that went into America at north of $100 a bottle or thereabouts. And people shook their heads and said, this is ridiculous. How can you do this for a South African wine? But you not only established it successfully at that price, but blazed something of a trail for a lot of other South African wine, Louis.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Dan, for the intro. Yes, when the maiden vintage was back in 2000, and then we launched the wine. Then was the most expensive wine in South Africa, and was more than about 375, 400 rand a bottle. And they said, how can you, without any track record, do that? And we decided, at that stage, we wanted to be internationally relevant. And I think you need to price yourself accordingly, and that's what we did with brand Ernie Els. So we were very ambitious with this project, and it really got well received in America. And as you said, and that gave us the momentum for the brand within the States, and say north of that $100 price point. And it's about taking South Africans serious from a wine perspective, and if you want to stand tall and be serious about the wine that you make, you need to also make sure that you have the whole full package from the tiering price point, from the quality of the wine, right through to the whole image and how you actually deliver that to the marketplace. And it's been an amazing journey, and I've been involved now for Ernie Els for 23 years now. I've made all the 23 vintages. I would rather say vintage 2023 has been made as we speak, and it has been amazing progression how the premium, ultra premium, I'll call it that, segment of the industry has grown over the last 20 years, and it's great for showcasing South African wine on the international stage, and that is where we want to have a recognition, and we have to make wines that are relevant. And I always tell my team, we can sit with we must make wines that are internationally relevant, but keep our identity and our DNA within the bottle. Dan?
I remember having Ernie on the show and talking to him about the start of this wine journey, and he was very open about it. He said, vintage one I can sell because I'm Ernie Els. Vintage two has to sell because the wine in vintage one was good enough to have people coming back. How nervous were you about putting this wine out at this sort of price and knowing that even though it's got the name of the most loved sports person that South Africa's produced over the last 2-3 decades on the front of it, it's still got to match up with something good inside the bottle?
Dan, you're 100% correct. I think we're one of the few brands I had to compete against the name Ernie Els for recognition. Competing against your own brand doesn't make any sense. But some people like to say, call it a celebrity wine, and how serious is it? A lot of celebrities add their name to products and they don't actually stand behind it. But Ernie stood behind this product from day one by purchasing the land that we are making the wine on today. And we have got a strategic partner as part of the brand success now at the moment. But that was Ernie's commitment, and I think that is what we see. And yes, the first bottle is nice to have that Ernie Els name on the bottle, but the second bottle is always about the quality of the wine. And we've only seen our brand grow over the last 23 years and going from strength to strength. So yes, sure, you're 100% correct. I have to fight, and even still today, after 23 years, I still have to fight the brand Ernie Els to get recognition for the wines we make on the farm. Dan?
It's a similar time frame in which one of our other brands this evening has been chipping away at the luxury market and doing so very, very effectively. Not the issue of a name on the front as with Ernie Els, Mike Radcliffe, but in building up Vilafonte, you weren't dissimilar in that you decided to create something where you backed yourself to the hilt. You said, this is top quality, ultra premium wine. We are going to price it accordingly, and that is how we are going to market. There were some confessed nerves from Louis and team when they kicked off. On the outside, Mike Radcliffe is always full of courage and confidence and enthusiasm. Inside, were there a few butterflies when you decided to take this product at this sort of price to market to see what would happen?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, I was just listening to everything that Louis said, and I was nodding as he was speaking because I shared a lot of the same things and the same feelings and emotions. But at the same time, I also had my own share of celebrity with the fact that I'd partnered with Dr. Phil Fries and Dr. Zelma Long, both celebrities in their own right in the world of wine. And I guess that was a significant opportunity for us to stand tall, having that kind of experience behind us. But yes, I think we launched our Series C at 350 Rand, which is not quite Ernie Els's price then, but it was also considered cheeky, borderline arrogant at the time. I also liked Louis' comment about being significant. If you're selling wine at $9.99 on the shelf in the United States, then you're a $9.99 wine. That's what you are. So if you can back up your price point and back it up with quality, then the nerves and butterflies tend to disappear somewhat.
One of your many attributes is one of the first kind of luxury wine marketing qualifications that was available anywhere in the world that you brought back from Australia and put to very good use. How much did that influence affect the way that you approached putting this brand to market in terms of a going down the road looking forward viewpoint, that not only would this dictate whether or not Vilafonte could work in this space, but that if it did, it might actually lead the South African market into brand new territory?
Well, I don't think that was really the thinking at the time. And if we had played even a small role in facilitating a little increase in the confidence level in general of the South African industry, then that's great. But I wouldn't like to credit myself with too much foresight, because at the time, not all of these intellectual forward-thinking thoughts were going through. We had dice in our hand and we were throwing the dice. At the same time, we felt that we were producing quality that had some sort of quiet voice which could quietly speak for itself. So no, I can't take too much credit, but I would like to say is that there is a growing cohort of great South African wines and a smaller cohort of great South African wineries who systematically are putting their shoulders back and saying, actually, our quality is as good as anything in the market. We're prepared to stand by it. And I can tell you that without that, we will never, as a country, Brand South Africa will never gain true international recognition until we actually show some confidence in our own product.
I want to come back to that conversation on quality and delivering that premium product collectively to an international market. But let me jump over to Mr. Robertson, whose Anthonij Rupert blend was also part of that initial salvo. And it's again, not dissimilar to Louis and to an extent Mike as well. Gareth, you would have had this challenge as the wines come to market. You've got wines that are associated with a name that is one of the world's leaders in luxury and bespoke and fine and top end. You've now got to produce a wine that, whether or not you like it, people are going to think, oh, this has got the Rupert name to it. We're expecting the very, very best. And that has to shape not only how you position it, but also the quality of the wine that you deliver.
Yeah, Dan, thanks very much, and great to be on the show again. Yeah, definitely. I think when we launched the blend, and the 2007 was the first vintage. It was very tricky. We had done 2 pilot blends in 2005 and 2006, and we deemed the 2007, which was a great vintage, to put into the market. We were very fortunate. We believed in the wine. And especially sort of Cabernet Franc driven. We got a great score from the Spectator, which also elevated it a bit. And also we had a bit of a platform to know Optima had paved the way, and we had to ensure that what we released was good. So, I think, it was definitely nerve-wracking, I won't lie to you.
You've produced a wine that is now very well established. When we drank it in 2016, it was also by that stage very well established, and I think it caught the eye for a number of reasons. But one of those is the amount of time that you spend before you decide to release a particular vintage of the blend. Obviously, a very conscious decision, but one that I think's had a really big impact on how people interpret your wine and where they position it.
Yeah, definitely. We're very fortunate. We have a proprietor who believes in releasing the wine at a later stage, and when it's drinking well and going to drink much better going forward. For our side, our Optima is only 4 years before we release it, and then usually some of the Anthonij Rupert blend and those, we release it after 5 to 6 years. So we are definitely behind the guys, but it definitely stands us in good stead of letting the wine, when people get it, it's really, really good.
Well, giving it time is a big component. Also a big component is what is going into it, the varietals chosen, the terroir from which they come. And that makes our final wine to speak of particularly interesting, which brings me to Mark LaRue at Waterford. And here you've got a space, Mark, where you also had a relatively young wine estate, a relatively young wine label, and the decision, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, to create something really special and stand out, which means you're working towards a point, as opposed to discovering something you've made is amazing and then branding it as such or positioning as such. You set out to create the very, very best. How does that, as a winemaker, as a wine team, change your approach to creating this premium when you're heading in that direction deliberately, as opposed to seeing what is the very best and then making something of that?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Dan. Working at Waterford, it was an extremely young brand. When we launched the gem in 2006, we were only around for shy of 10 years. So a very young brand that had to go out into the market and releasing a wine that was relatively high priced at the time. I think at the time it was the most expensive South African wine. But I mean, at the time, Gareth was actually part of the team back then. I think young, ambitious, a crowd that really wanted to take South Africa's wine overseas and really be proud of what South Africa can produce. I think a very different outlook, as you say, started from scratch. All the vineyards basically on Waterford have been replanted since the property was bought in 97. So definitely production driven, from planting the vineyards on the correct soils with a very sort of clear outlook in creating a gem blend that represents the property. So I think from day one, quality was always going to be the priority, and creating a wine that can represent us. And we felt that wine needed to be of sort of a fine wine status. And I think, it's something that we're very, very proud of. And I think the same goes for all the other wines that are still sitting here today. I think we can be extremely proud, that we are 25 years old and basically still selling a super premium wine at quite a good price. I think that's a very good sort of tap on the shoulders for all of us, that we can do it and make South Africa proud.
Offering that wine as you did when you came out at such a high price, it can say one of two things. It can say, "Oh, this is arrogant. This is ridiculous. How can you possibly be charging so much for wine?" Or people go, "Geez, that must be good. It's expensive. I'm going to try and save up for it. I'd love to try it one day." I think we have a world that's a bit more acceptant of that kind of thing in South African wine today than we would have when it first released. How difficult was it for Waterford to get over that hurdle and to make the people who weren't initially convinced that this wasn't just some big money marketing statement, but was actually a statement of intent that this is how good we believe the wine is, and that is why we have the price tag on it?
Yeah, Dan, we had to take the wine overseas. There was no ways we could show it locally and convince South Africans. I think we are unfortunately too spoilt with all the good quality wine that we have in our country. So the goal was definitely to travel the waters, go across to key markets, go across to Europe, go to UK, go to USA, and actually show those people and compete with the Napa $100 cabs, compete with the real top Bordeaux's and the top European wines, because that's the only way we were going to. The pricing was actually dictated. So the pricing was actually dictated on an unlabeled bottle of wine that was taken across overseas, and the comment was, this must be $100 priced wine. So we converted that with the exchange rate and launched the wine at 625 Rand a bottle.
I don't know what is more striking, the fact that you sold it as an unlabeled, or the fact that 625 Rand used to be $100. We wish those days were still with us. Mike, if I could jump back to you on that note, and the movement of luxury and wine luxury in particular in South Africa, from where you guys were when you started, and I think even when we did this show in 2016, where the four wines I had, these were very much seen as, crikey, well, maybe one day I'll have it for a 50th birthday or for a really, really super special occasion. The acceptance of fine wine and as being something South Africa can do and is justified in pricing accordingly, I think has shifted fairly dramatically. Is that a fair assessment? Just on mute there, Mike.
I think the reality is that I prefer to speak about fine wine rather than luxury. Luxury is something that's defined by the consumer perception. It can't be defined by the producer. So on your question about fine wine, ultimately fine wine is an outcome defined by two major criteria. And firstly is quality, which is absolute. And secondly, it's value. And value is a perception. And so at any price point of any product, there is always a fulcrum where a consumer will perceive value. I would argue, and I think it would be an easy argument to make, that of the four particular wineries that are on your show today, all of them represent outrageous value to the global consumer relative to the quality that they're presenting and the price at which they're presented to the public. And that's something which I think needs to be shouted from the rooftops. These wines might be expensive from a South African Rand perspective, but on the global scene, they're barely touching the surface of expensive. They're not even getting close to expensive. But at the same time, I think that they are massively over-delivering in quality, which ultimately drives the value.
And I don't disagree with that at all. It's a point I want to expand, but I do want to go back to luxury, because I think there is a growing segment of South Africa, which, like it or not, I call your wine fine wine, you call it fine wine, but there are people who see it and want to be seen with it as a luxury product, as they might want to be seen with a bottle of Moët Chandon or a bottle of Veuve Clicquot or an international champagne or perhaps a big name international wine. And it might be a different reason for drinking the wine to the one that you and I have, Mike, but for me it reflects the status of South African wine that shows how much it has grown in the perception of certain areas of the market.
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no question about that. It also reflects a change in the demographics in the population. It also reflects a growing perception of wine as something that would fit into their traditional definition of luxury. So, in that sense, I guess it's a good thing, and in fact, it is a good thing. At the same time, you could argue that in defining luxury, the difference between a wine that sells at 100 Rand and another wine that sells at 1,000 Rand is 10 times. But luxury is all about, isn't about proportional value. It's about tangible. Can you actually taste the difference? Is it significantly better? And I think the wine industry is doing itself great service at the moment by producing wines that are just shooting the lights out, and that is fueling the luxury boom. And just a final comment on this. Luxury can only exist in a place where demand exceeds supply. And the wineries that are on the show tonight are all in a fortunate position where they could probably sell their production 3 times over.
Well, it could indeed, particularly when, as Mike points out, the prices by international standards, given the quality of this wine, are exceptional. And it applies to far more than just these 4 wines. And I think, Louis, you might have been, when you first took Signature to the market at $100 in the States, far and away the most expensive wine South Africa had ever taken to America. You might have been, like Mark subsequently was, the most expensive South African wine on the local market. That is no longer the case. And that's not a reflection on your quality dropping or anything no longer being as good. In fact, from the wine I've drunk recently from both estates, it's as good, if not better, than it's ever been. It rather suggests that this market has become a lot more crowded, and through an increase in both quality and perhaps a little bit of self-confidence in some of the brands, we now see that ultra premium sector being a lot busier and a lot more exciting.
Yes, from a South African perspective, our industry is actually smaller than the whole Bordeaux one in its own. So from this perspective, we as South African winemakers and South African wine industry, we need to push really hard on our premium side of the business, because we haven't got volume to actually supply the world market, but we've got quality to supply the world market. And I really believe that Brand South Africa and the wines that we make, especially in the Stellenbosch region on Cabernet and Cabernet Sauvignon based blends, is good enough as any Cabernet based blends or Cabernet around the world. And we need to showcase this. And the more we can push the premium end of the market, so we will be seen much more in the light, and we can get a better return on investment for Brand South Africa, which we can reinvest into our industry to create a better industry for everybody from the ground level up. To everybody that enjoys a bottle of wine. So it's really, I think it's important that we keep pushing the upper limits of the industry from a quality perspective, which then creates a vacuum behind us, which other wines can fill in and then even surpass us, as you said, which I don't mind at all, because there's when you as soon as you leave these shores, and we've all spoken about the international market. We're a band of South Africans that need to stick together, and we actually very small out there. We're always on the bottom left-hand side of the international shelves. We want to position ourselves right in the middle of the premium market and push that and see what quality. And it's great to see the international wine media actually taking recognition of the wines that we are making on the premium side, and the new wave of styles of ready. It's only about Cabernet; it's about all different varieties now that are leading the way, such as Shiraz, Chenin Blancs, white blends, Mediterranean blends that are showcasing on an ultra premium level. And I think that's great to see from a South African wine perspective. Dan?
Which leads to another question, because I have two very conflicting responses to that suggestion that we keep pushing the premium. The South African wine lover, that's absolutely fantastic. The South African wine industry getting bigger and better. But then there's Dan, the wine buyer. And I'm going, no, stop pushing these prices up. I want to be buying this wine myself. Mark, how does that affect your ability to price wine when on one hand, you want to be able to have this $100, £100 a bottle wine sitting in restaurants and top bottle stores and supermarket shelves in the UK, in Europe and America. But on the other hand, you still want to be able to reward a South African audience who have supported you from the very beginning, who like to buy your wine, but now suddenly wine's hitting, you know, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 rand a bottle. It becomes a little more daunting for the local market. Is there a way of balancing those two, Mark?
I think it's becoming really tough, Dan. A lot of our glass is being shipped from overseas. Corks are being imported. Packaging is becoming quite a local nightmare, just running out of paper, running out of labels. And we're seeing price increases, I think, on production, not even sort of north of 20%. So we're seeing a 25% increase on production. Labor is not getting any cheaper, and load shedding, burning diesel like anything these days. So unfortunately, these are just raw costs that are really picking up and catching up on us. And 8% is not the norm. It's nowhere near that. So at some point, it's going to really catch up on us. And unfortunately, you know, as sad as what that sounds, if the local market can't pick up and sort of come up with the prices that we need to start offering for our wines, they might not be able to get it. And the only opportunity will be to pick up a bottle from overseas.
Speaking of which, Lisa Harlow's watching the show. Interesting conversations today in a global sense. Top South African wines over-deliver every time. I tasted the 15 gem yesterday. It was outstanding. I also see Sophia is watching. Hello, Sophia. Hello, Farmer Mike, says one of Mr. Radcliffe's many fans. Gareth, jumping across to you, and the not dissimilar question, but in terms of that balance, when you're getting up to this ultra premium level, how much is selling this kind of wine overseas simply an economic question, and how much does it drive the image of the brand, where people are now buying your wine domestically go, oh geez, that wine's done so well overseas, that now appeals to me. That's a really cool reason to want to know more about it, because it's done really well internationally, and the South Africans, we're often a little bit wowed by the international factor. Does that come into the reckoning in terms of how you try and geographically position this ultra premium wine that you're selling?
Yeah, Dan, like, you know, we've always been passionate about selling wine locally, and you know, our current sales, we almost do 85% locally. So, you know, the local market is very important to us. Having said that, you know, the international market is where we need to grow, and I think having these top end wines or your flagship wines, you definitely need to have that marker when you go abroad, and where people can aim at and see the quality, and then you obviously have your different levels going down. I think, you know, there is a market in South Africa for luxury premium wines that we're talking about, but it is very limited. So people are forced to start pushing it abroad. And once they go abroad, they are, as the guys have said today, great values for what they are, and when compared to other wines from other regions. So yeah, I think from our side, our strategy going forward is definitely to try and sell more abroad, but the local market is important. And I think it is having different wines at different price points to look after the local market and keep that support going.
And then by extension from that, Gareth, when you are looking at wine internationally, I remember sending a pitch years ago to a bank for a sponsorship opportunity, and I got a very candid response with a bit of a laugh. Send me something for 50,000 rand, I'll ignore it. Send me something for 5 million rand, and I'll have a serious look at it. Are we having to pitch these kind of wines internationally at a certain price point to be taken seriously at that wine really is good enough to compete at the kind of levels that we believe it can?
I think sadly, don't know, Dan, like we've got a long way to go internationally. Sadly, I'm generalizing now that a lot of people perceive South African wines to be on the lower price point, but we make exceptional wines that can easily command the prices that we sell them at. So it's quite a big mind check, because I think majority of the wines being poured in abroad have been cheaper wines, or lower priced wines, if I had to say. So I think, you know, with Mike and Louis and obviously Mark's wines, you know, I wish we could produce more to have more of a footprint internationally, and we've got to scale it to get more of that imprint. I don't know if you think about the Penfolds Grange and those sort of wines that have done well for Australia. So I think we're definitely on the track there. The quality, like in the last 10 years, coming out of South Africa has been superb, and people have been more active in the international market, and I can only see it getting better. But it's a hard slog, and getting out there, recommending other people's wines and flying flag South Africa is very important, because the more of their wines doing well and people taking and tasting those wines, it helps everyone in the industry.
I have 3 of the 4 winemakers' wines. I think, why do I not have 4? Well, I put the wines out last night just so I didn't forget them when I had the show ready today. Went out to host the launch of Halo, the brand new ride service, which I'll be telling you a bit more about later on in the week, and came home and could only find 3 of them. I asked my wife if she'd seen a bottle of Waterford the Gem. She looked up, smiled, said, "Yes, darling, it was delicious. Have you got any more?" Unfortunately, the answer is no, so I don't have it with me, but it's a wine I certainly know well enough to talk about with you, Mark. If somebody comes up to you for the first time and they go, "Geesh, Mark, this wine is so expensive. Why on earth is it so expensive? Why does it deserve this price?" What for you, as the winemaker, as objectively as it is possible to be, what says this is ultra premium, this makes this wine quite so special?
Hi, Dan. I think the first thing we have to sort out is make sure that you get a replacement bottle for your wife. Well, not for your wife, for you, that your wife stole from you. So I'll make that happen. Yeah, the gem for me, it's such a long story, and there's so many things that make it so special. And I think the one thing is, you know, with winemaking and making a product of such quality, it doesn't happen overnight. It comes from many, many years. And even though it's wine, we talk about a vintage and we talk about 1 year of creating that wine, but to actually create that wine comes from many years of experience and putting blends together and learning from a vineyard and trying to clean up your mistakes so that eventually you can get to that vintage, which we launched in 2004. And you get to that vintage of you've cleaned up your mistakes over those years. So it's paying school fees a little bit, and also just the investment, the property that you're sitting on, and, you know, really making sure that you have ownership of the perfect property or the perfect soils to grow the vineyards in, so that you can make this wine of such a quality. So it is something very difficult to put rands and cents on milliliters, but I think looking at the value of the vineyards and what it takes and the learning curve. And I've been at Waterford for 14 years, and I don't think I'm even near to making, I think, the perfect gem in my mind. I always think there's still lots of tools that we can sharpen up with. I won't say that any gem has been short, but I mean, I still feel there's so much progress that we can achieve, and it's just year on year learning and adding on all the experience and making sure that we're putting a better and better gem together.
We'll get an update in a moment on what the next gem will be as we race through the show. It's been a great deal of fun this evening. I'm having a look, Mr. Ratcliffe. One of the really cool touches, he's a shrewd marketing man, Mike Ratcliffe, isn't he? What you can see here, this comes around a bottle and it gives you a bit of a history. It shows you some of the previous vintages, some details of this one. In this case, the 2017 that was released in November 2019. It's 50% Cabernet Sauvignon, 21% Merlot, some Cab Franc, and some Malbec, and it comes together in the form of the Series C. If you look at whether it's this particular vintage or one of the recent ones, where you've got to now with this Series C in particular, Mike, how close as a wine and as a perceived wine is this to what you were imagining when you kickstarted this project?
Wow, that's that question could take us down a rabbit's hole, Dan. I guess the best way to answer it is to go back to the early 2000s when Zelma and Phil and I were started blending the first wines, and originally our mission was to actually make a single wine. And it turns out our vineyard spoke a different story, and we ended up with two wines, one more juicy and soft and one more structured, which turned into Series M and Series C. And so I think we've made a huge amount of progress in that, in nurturing our vineyard across the paths of time. Also, we haven't had much staff turnover, so the same people are making the wine that started making the wine, which is kind of cool. So I think we're very pleased where we are, but there is still a dream, I call it an unfulfilled dream, of producing a single wine. And I had never spoken about it publicly before, but we are a number of years into experimenting and researching, because Vision 2030 for Vilafonte involves ultimately producing just one wine, which is a rather big thing to say. It may never happen because the wine needs to be substantially better. But to answer your question, we are delighted with the Series M and Series C, and we're internally asking ourselves a big question about what does Vilafonte taste like, and could that perhaps be the ultimate expression of our vineyard? So watch the space.
There's never a shortage of excitement when it comes to the Vilafonte operation. This is the Series C in hand, and it was exactly this wine, albeit a slightly younger vintage, that we drank on the show back in 2016. One of the elements in creating this kind of premium luxury wine when it is a blend is not just getting it right today, but making sure that you've got something that's going to be right in 10 years time, or in the case of this particular wine, in 15 years time, because Bear Robertson, I do have the 2008. So I think this was the second vintage of the wine that you made. How difficult is it as a team, the winemaker, the tasting team will form part of this process, to not just get it right for now, but to kind of second guess where this wine is going to be going, and know that the percentage I put in of a particular varietal is going to play the right kind of part, so that in 15 years time, when my friend Dan opens his bottle, he's going to have 750 mils of absolutely rock star red blend.
Dan, yeah, no, I think it's always a difficult task to the winemakers, and Darby does a phenomenal job. I think for us on the journey that we've been with the flagship blend is really getting to know our own vineyards well. You know, we started experimenting in 2005, releasing in 2007, and current vintage 2015 at the moment. And I think what has been amazing is having vineyards that we sort of dial back into, and knowing that these vineyards are our best vineyards, and actually reaping those awards. So it is exciting every year. I think as a lot of the other winemakers, and as Mark alluded to, is really fine tuning it every year. And I confidently say, like, every year Darby seems to be making a better blend. And also we only release it in great years. You know, if there are years that we don't feel is deemed as good as the previous one, we don't release it. Obviously there are vintage variations. But I think it boils down from our side is really getting to know the vineyards, and as they get older, and also knowing when to pick and how to harvest, and all those different things that all add up. But yeah, I think our thing is actually all homegrown vineyards that we use and put it into the blend.
and clearly knows so well, which is how this knits together quite brilliantly. Grant Saul's busy watching on YouTube. Great lineup, Dan. I like the fact that all these producers have good cellar defender wines, which makes the premium wines even more desirable in my viewpoint. Shrewd, as always, from Grant Saul's. Over to the final one. And the one I've got here is a very specifically chosen vintage. It is the 2013 of the Ernie Els Signature. And I dropped in for lunch at Ernie Els on Friday, caught up very briefly with Louis, who was hard at work in the middle of his harvest, but had time to partner the bottle of the 2013. 10 years on, a wine that is sitting in a really, really nice drinking space. It's just a beautifully comfortable and engaging red blend, and one that highlights a story we've told many times on the show before, and which we spoke about on that very first show back in 2016, that this is a combination, Louis, of your own wine expertise, but also the raw palate of Mr. Theodore Ernest Els, who, despite his Kempton Park background, which was more very brown wine mixed with Coca-Cola, knew time and again that this was the type of wine he wanted to drink, and this was the kind of wine he wanted to put his signature to.
Yes, Dan, this one was born, and in essence, we can talk a lot about price and what the wine is and where it is, but in the end, it's about the enjoyment of wine. It doesn't matter what price it is and what premium level it is, and that's how this wine was born. We put 5 wines on the table, and I said to Ernie, you need to make a choice on which wine we have to make. So then Ernie said, he doesn't know much about wine. So, but that's the great thing about wine. You don't have to know anything to know what you like. I said, taste the 5 wines and just tell me the number you like. And that is how the signature was born back in 2000. And it's about the enjoyment of wine, and it was that day. It was Cabernet focused. I did lead him, as you say. I've got the winemaking expertise. I did lead him down a little bit of a path. I did keep it Cabernet based, but then bring percentages of different percentages of Merlot and Cabernet. And the Petit Verdot and Malbec into the blend. And that is where this signature was born, which was 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, which gives us that ability to age. And Cabernet is the king of reds, and that is the foundation which this wine is built on. And the 2013, as you mentioned, it really is drinking really beautiful at the moment. And that's a test of true quality, is the ability of the wine to age. Looked after really well, get the good cellar conditions. A lot of people believe, you buy a wine, you don't have to look after it. And I think they make a big mistake that to cellaring wine is really important if you want to get the premiumization out of the wine. And that wine has been sold in our winery at perfect conditions. And we have a program where we do a 10-year release on our wines. And this year, that's why you'll see the 2013, which we release back into the market 10 years. And we look after that wine for 10 years. And it's great to show people the appreciation of the investment into premium wines. Because that is what, if a person is spending a lot of money on a bottle of wine, he wants to make sure that he gets a return on investment. And we need to showcase that from a wine. You need to stand behind your wine and make sure that wine within 10 years, even 15 years from now, is still standing the test of time. And that's the true reflection of the quality of the wine that you make on the farm, Dan.
There's a small village in Greece called Mavromati, my wife's home village, where both of my children were christened and where Ernie Els wine, thanks to Louis and Ernie, was drunk. In that village, they have no idea that Ernie Els is a golfer. They just know it as a wine brand. Can you say fairly confidently, Louis, that after starting in competition with Ernie the golfer as a wine producer, that Ernie Els as a wine brand is now standing very healthily on its own 2 feet?
Very much, Dan. So I always say, look at this, like Nas would say, look at the scoreboard. And the scoreboard says we very much can see we're very much on our own, standing on our own 2 feet, and becoming much more as a relevant as a wine producer, which is really great to see. And it's that true testament of like you say, that the 10-year report is coming out now, and we'll see what happens from that. But that is the quality of the time when third parties start giving you recognition of the wine that you make. And that is where the true reflection of the quality comes from, Dan.
That Wine Mag 10-year report will be featured in the next few weeks on Dan Really Likes Wine. Just before we wrap up, this has flown by this evening. Bear, very quickly, I think you said 2015 is the vintage you're working on now. Is that the one we will see released later this year, or is it already in the market?
Dan, it's just been released on the 1st of March. So, yeah, we're super excited to know. Obviously, 15 was a fantastic vintage. And with our regime of releasing it later, sort of missed the big hype behind the 15s. But the one is in superb condition. And I do think it's one of Darby's best that he's made. So we're very excited about it. So, yeah, I can only see good things to come.
Tell me about the Waterford gem, Mark. Where are you with it, and when is the next one on the horizon?
Yeah, currently selling, Dan, we're on sort of the last little stretches, but we're launching the 2016 very shortly. Not quite sure how long it's going to last. It's done relatively well, sort of in the pre-reviews, sort of running up. So that's very, very exciting. I don't have an exact date like Gareth could spit out, but I mean, we're looking at sort of mid-year in the next sort of month or so. So that's quite exciting for us to launch the next gem.
And speaking of launches, there's one that's coming up very, very soon indeed. Mike Radcliffe and I will be catching up at Norman Goodfellows in 4 ways towards the end of this month, because at the very start of next month, if I've got my dates right, Mike, to much excitement and probably the near crashing of the Vilafonte server, your new Series C will be upon us.
Yeah, you actually got that almost right, Dan. It's the Series M that's being released at the end of the month. Yes, and we are already fully allocated, and unfortunately nothing additional available from the seller. It's the 2020 vintage, but top retailers in the country and around the world have all got allocations, so that's the best place to go to get it. And the Series C 2020, as you know, is unfortunately gone. It's sold out. So, but 2020 M is coming very shortly, and pretty excited about that too.
All right, there we go. My mistake there. We will be drinking both of them, though, very, very happily indeed. And if you want to get hold of the 2013 in particular, well, this is available, the Ernie Els Signature, together with the 14 and the 15 in a special edition trio on the new Dan Really Likes Wine pop-up store at Norman Goodfellows. So drop in online and grab a 10-year-old Ernie Els Signature that I think might be featuring in the Wine Mag report coming up, along with the 14 and 15 to follow it. Guys, thank you to all four of you for sharing some fine wine history and stories. It's taken me back very happily to that day in 2016. I had absolutely no idea in 2016 that 6.5 years later or thereabouts, I would still be doing this little wine show, which has become a slightly bigger wine show. But a big part of it has been able to have fun with wine such as that which you guys make, and to hang out with guys like yourselves to keep educating me and sharing stories. So thank you, not just for today, but for all being a really, really big part of the Dan Really Likes Wine story. And as we kick off our new journey with Norman Goodfellows, we look forward to sharing much more wine with you and creating even more stories. So guys, thank you very much, and cheers.
Well done, Dan.
Cheers. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, there we go. From four of the big names of South African wine: Louis Strydom at Ernie Els, Mike Radcliffe at Vilafonte, Mark LaRue at Waterford, and from Anthonij Rupert, Gareth Robertson, with a collection of the wines that we had on the very first show back in November of 2016. We've come a long way from there, and we've got a long way still to go as this new journey with Norman Goodfellows gets underway. It continues next week when I will be joining members of the Cape Winemakers Guild, both the new guild members and the new proteges, and that is happening on Monday. I will see you then. I'm off to the Old Oak this evening to join John Smith for an evening of food and wine that we are co-hosting. I will see you back on the show next week. Goodbye.